Last week, I asked the question, what if today was your last day? And that's an important question, and that's something we all need to think about. What if today was my last day? Because today is the only day that you're actually promised. But today I want to tell you a story, a sweet story that I've heard my good friend Bob Russell tell because it happened to people that went to his church. He said that there were two people in his church, some wonderful people named John and Doris, and they took care of an old widow named Bernice. And Bernice had reached the point where she could no longer care for herself, and so John and Doris did everything they could to take care of Bernice. Bernice asked them, she said, please don't let me go to a nursing home at the end of my life. And they promised her they would take care of her as long as they possibly could. Bernice was a retired school teacher. She had been a Sunday school teacher in her Baptist church for years, just a woman who loved the Lord. Well, it finally got to the place where they could no longer take care of Bernice, and they explained it to her that she needed more care than they could provide, and she understood. And so they went over and they packed up her belongings and they put them in the back of John's pickup truck, and he led the way to the care facility with Doris and Bernice riding along in the car behind. Doris was driving, and as she was driving, she looked over at Bernice, and it looked as if Bernice had fallen asleep and she had slumped over in the seat. And so Doris pulled over so she could fix the seatbelt on Bernice. And when she did, she realized that Bernice had passed away. She finally got back on the road and went over to the care facility, and John met her and he said, what happened? I thought you were right behind me. And she said, I was, but we had to make a stop by heaven along the way. Isn't that just an amazing story? Sweet Bernice went off to be with the Lord instead of going off to that nursing home facility. That is just an adorable story, and it's kind of the way I think we'd all like to die. Would you like to die like that? But the percentage of people that's going to have to is going to be incredibly small. Now, the percentage of people who are going to die is 100%. We're all going to have to face that one day. Nobody can escape that. And for some people, that is a very scary thing because they have no idea what's going to happen when they step over that threshold at the end of their life. I have a really sweet friend here in Georgia, and I've been talking to her a lot lately. She's 92 now, and she's thinking about death a lot. Not that she's on the verge. I think she looks to me like she could live for many more years, but it's on her mind. And she has been talking to me about being baptized and some things. And so I love talking to her because she realizes that her life is probably coming close to an end. You know, Jesus talked an awful lot about death, and he gave us some pictures of things because we need to understand that he only told us, he told us that there were only two places where we would go when we died. In the story in Matthew chapter 25, he talks about the sheep and the goats. The sheep are those who follow the shepherd's voice. They know him, he knows them. They're part of the fold. And the sheep, he said, would go to be with him eternally in heaven. But the goats are those who wanted nothing to do with God. They're separate from God, separate from him, and they would be eternally separated from him at the end of life. In the story of the rich man and Lazarus, Lazarus dies and he goes to be by Abraham's side. The rich man dies and he goes to hell. And Jesus said there's a great chasm fixed between the two places, and one could not cross over from one place to the next. He didn't say there was another option. He said one went to heaven and one went to hell. When Jesus hung on the cross, he hung there between two thieves. One ridiculed him and said, oh, if you're the Messiah, save yourself and us. But the other one was contrite, and he asked Jesus to remember him. And Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise. Again, a picture of there are only two places that we will go at the end of life. My point today is that we need to keep short accounts with God. It is not spiritually healthy in any way for us to rack up sins, as many as we can imagine, and then just hope that one day when we get to our deathbed, go, well, I'm going to ask Jesus to forgive me. After all, I was baptized once when I was 10. That doesn't indicate somebody who's a believer at all. No, we need to keep short accounts with God. We don't even have to wait till our evening prayers to ask God to forgive us of some sin that we've committed during the day. If we recognize it in the moment, we should say, Jesus, I was outside of your will there. I know that was not right. Please forgive me. Help me to do better. Forgive my sin and help me make the right choice next time and get back on that right road. So my appeal to you today is if you know you're outside of God's will, then you definitely need to repent and turn your heart back over to God. I shudder at the thought to think about what could have happened in my life if I had died back when I was outside of God's will and I was living outside of his plan for my life. I just don't even want to think about having to stand before him in that moment. But God, in his grace and his mercy, has given me another chance, and I have repented of my sins, and I'm I've turned my heart back to him, and I want to walk faithfully with him every single day. But if you're hearing my voice, do not harden your heart. If you know there's something you need to do and you need to walk away from something, then I encourage you right now to repent of it, to walk away from it, to get out of it, and to ask for help and assistance and ask God to forgive you so that you might have a right way with God going forward. You know, the Apostle Paul says these words in Romans chapter 7. It's really powerful. He says, we know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. I think we all understand that. And boy, we know the good we should do and we don't do it, and we know the wrong that we shouldn't do and we do it. And I think a lot of people have analyzed that over the years and said, I think I know what Paul was up to. I think he had a secret sin. I've thought about this more and more. I think Paul was just spiritually sensitive to sin. I think he got to a place in his life where he realized, I want to know when I'm outside of God's will and I see even the slightest movement in the wrong direction, and I sense that, and I know that's the sin nature in me, and I want to submit everything I have over to Jesus, and I want him to cure me and heal me of that sin nature, and I want to walk faithfully with him in the Spirit all the time. We need to be like that. We need to be so spiritually sensitive that we recognize even the slightest sin, the slightest step outside of God's will, and not live intentionally outside of God's will, like I've done in the past. Don't do that. No, repent and turn your heart back to Jesus. Hear me today. Today is the day to repent, turn your heart back to God. We need to all keep short accounts with God. That is the best way to live. I hope this is helpful to you. If it is, I pray you'll like and subscribe down below. Keep walking with Jesus. Keep asking him to nudge you. I'll do the same. Let's stay on that narrow path. I'll see you next week.